welcome guys. So thank you for coming. We realize it's in the middle of the residency fair, so most of our audience is kind of over there, but we really appreciate that you all came. So my name is Sara Paradise. I'm a fellow at UC Irvine in med ed tech, so it's kind of a cool twist between design and medical education and technology. We have here Megan Osborn, our program director at UC Irvine, and then Alisa Wray, who's an assistant program director as well. So today we're going to be talking about a really cool concept. It's called gamification, or games in medical education. So a lot of us are using this. It's an increasing trend to engage millennial learners. I'm sure many of you guys have seen over the past 10 years, things are kind of shifting to be more interactive. So what we'd really like you to take away today is to have some really practical things you can go back to your program and try to engage people during didactics. Oh, click. Okay, so here's our objectives. So first, we're going to actually define gamification. What is it? And how do you appropriately apply it to your didactic sessions? We're going to help you to incorporate several new gaming strategies into conference, and then how to creatively use medals to commend positive performance. So,
definition of gamification. So gamification is the use of game elements and game design in non-game contexts. And we're going to go in a little bit deeper with that in the next couple slides.
It's a technical definition. So a few terms I want you all to be familiar with because this comes up in the literature when you're reading about gamification. So game elements are the first one. So what is this? This is kind of how you build your game. So it's the points, it's how you keep score, the strategy behind the game. Game design techniques are kind of the why. Like, why are you doing it? How are you making people engage? How are you going to be competitive? So this is what our residents really like. And then for us, this is a non-game context, right? So this is applying game elements to medical education.
So two real-world examples of gamification, and I'm sure some of you guys have seen these on YouTube or going around as memes and whatnot. But on one side here, we have this piano staircase, and this is an awesome gamification of, you know, a little bit of exercise and getting people to actually take the stairs. So what it is they noticed that people were always taking the escalator on the way up, and what they did was they put piano keys on each of the stairs. And it's not just the way it looks. When you step on it, it actually makes a piano type noise. And so they gamified going upstairs. People suddenly were very excited to actually walk up the stairs because every time they stepped on it, it clinked a little. They were able to like jump up and down and jump back and kind of make some noise. And they noticed that people were starting to take the stairs a lot more than they were using the escalator. On the other side, we have the world's longest trash can. And this is one that I think is really fun. And what they did was they tried to gamify picking up litter in the city. And so every time you throw something into the trash can, it makes a dropping noise. So it's like, whoo, plop. And so people were really excited about it. So they started to go and they started to pick up trash and they'd throw it in the trash can, and kids were loving the noise and adults were loving the noise. And they were able to take a real world issue and gamify it to make it a little bit more fun and get people a little more engaged.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about some terms. So I just want to go into game elements because it's going to come into play when we talk about a few of the activities that we do at our own program. So there's a few different things. You can give people points, badges, and create leaderboards, okay? So points are obviously, the more points the better. People can get points from doing different activities. The badges is kind of the visual representation of achievements. The way I think about this is the game of life. Did you guys ever play the game of life? I played a lot growing up. So at the end, if you're successful, you have your car, you have all the kids in your car, you have maybe the best job, the best salary, that sort of thing. So this is kind of how you visually represent their achievement. And then one way to do that would be leaderboard. So Megan's going to talk a little bit in a second about how you could keep a medal board to commend positive performance. So let's start playing.
So let's start at the most basic level of gamification. And so basically gamification just means I'm going to make something that's not a game, and I'm going to gamify it so that there is competition potentially and there's motivation. And so one thing that you can do if you don't really want to invest a lot of time and effort into your residency program in terms of games is you can just start with this. And so what we first started with is we started with 3 bulletin boards in our resident room. We have one for the R1s, one for the R2s, and one for the R3s. And we basically give them badges every time they have some sort of achievement. And so some of the badges are Ultrasound of the block. So we tasked our ultrasound fellows with this. The ultrasound fellows had to pick the best ultrasound image for the month. They would email everybody out and say, congratulations, Dr. Pena, he had the best ultrasound image this month. He got ultrasound of the block. So Dr. Pena gets a badge on the R3 leaderboard, and so the residents get really excited about this. The next thing is competitions, and Dr. Wray and Dr. Paradise will go over some of the competitions that we have in our residency program. We have lots of competitions in our residency program, but one thing we like to do is the CPC competition. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that from CORD, and so we bring that to our own residency, and we have our R1s and our R2s present cases that our R3s have to solve, and the winner of that competition gets a badge on the leaderboard as well. We give them badges for getting publications and scholarly activity. If they get abstracts accepted at SAEM, we put a badge on the leaderboard. If they get a publication in Western Journal of Emergency Medicine or in JEDEM or any other journal, we put a badge up on the leaderboard. Like I said, national presentations. And then we have lots more badges. We have diagnosis of the block. They get a badge if they won the weekly quiz, the weekly reading quiz. We give them badges if their class was the most on time to conference. So we have like the R1s get the badge for Block 7 because most of their members were on time to conference every day. So we have a lot of different badges. And it's a nice way to recognize the residents throughout the year. I usually get up about once a month at the beginning of a conference and then just go through all the new badges that everybody earned. And the residents get really excited and get really into it. And so that's just one really easy way to gamify your residency. We'll talk about kind of gamification 2.0 for the more complex educator that wants to really get into gamifying, and Dr. Paradise will talk about that.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about an audience response system that we use. Have any of you all used Kahoot? Raise your hand if you've ever played Kahoot. What's the best part about Kahoot? The music. It's so great. So we really like Kahoot because it's really fun and simple to use. So for both the educator, it's easy to make the quizzes, and the learner, it's very easy to use. So let me show you kind of the overview. So basically you log in through your phone. There's either an app or you can go online. And then it has different quizzes. So mostly lends itself well to multiple choice quizzes, and they simply select the shape that they believe is the correct answer. So people get points for both the speed in which they answer the question and then the accuracy, obviously. And then people who do well would go on the leaderboard to say they got, the most points in their Kahoot quizzes. So it's a nice way to kind of give them points for knowledge that they're attaining. We also do Quiz Bowl for reviewing board review, and then we do a weekly reading quiz this way. So this is kind of how we get people to do their reading and get points based off of it.
And Quiz Bowl, we have it the 2 weeks before the in-training exam, and so we have all the residents come, and they can wear their sweats to conference, and they basically sit in the resident room, and we just have this giant Quiz Bowl with a bunch of Kahoots, and then whoever wins that gets a badge on the leaderboard too.
One of the things I really love about Kahoot is rather than standard, asking multiple choice questions where only one person gets to participate, in Kahoot everyone gets to participate, and they got automatic feedback right away, which I think is really important.
And it's free.
Yes, for sure. Free is always good. The next thing we're going to talk about is Sim Wars. So I know Sim Wars is kind of a trademark name. We use that name for our residency, Sim Wars, as well. So Sim Wars, the national level, it's mostly case-based. When we do it with our residents, we do a couple different steps in our Sim Wars. We start the day out with a medical knowledge relay. And so what we did this last year was we had a table with all kinds of useful things for emergency medicine on it. It had epi doses, it had bicarb, it had MAC blades, ET tubes, all kinds of tools they might need throughout the day. And then subsequently what we did was we did a multiple choice question round, and every time a team got a question right, they got to go up and get something to put in their pack for the day. And the goal was they wanted as many things as possible, because if they didn't get something, they weren't going to have it to use for the rest of the day. After that, we do an AIRWAY course, we have a task trainer relay, and then we also do some cases with them. So I'm going to break it down a little bit further. Our AIRWAY wars, what we like to do with that is we like to have multiple AIRWAY heads positioned in some really awkward positions. So we usually tape one up underneath the table so it's hanging upside down. We usually put one AIRWAY head like shoved all the way in the corner. We'll have a pediatric AIRWAY with some kind of a foreign body that's shoved down into the neck. That way the residents have to go in, they have to get it out, and then they have to intubate as well. And then we set a story for each airway head, and it requires that they intubate in a certain manner. So it may say that you have to remove the foreign body first, and then you have to set up a transtracheal jet ventilation for this airway head. Or it may be that you have to intubate the upside down head with digital intubation. Or you may have to use fiber optics or a bougie. And so we kind of force them to intubate in different ways. And they get points, because obviously this is a game, somebody's going to have to win. They get points based on, you know, how quickly they intubate, how many attempts it takes them, and how accurately it's done. After our airway wars, we run our sim cases. This is an example of one of our sim cases that we do. And our sim cases all have critical actions, and they all have checklists that a moderator checks off while they're watching the sim case. And that's how they get points for those. Typically, we run about 4 cases when we do our sim wars. We usually have 2 cases that are very bread and butter emergency medicine that we expect all of our learners to be able to hit all of the critical actions and really, you know, really get those cases down. And then we usually have 2 cases that are a little bit more off the wall. This is an example of one of our off the wall cases. So this was a female who had a PEA arrest, and they had to perform a perimortem C-section. And we created a perimortem C-section task trainer for it. A little bit, you know, something that hopefully, I hope never, our learners will never have to see, but something we wanted them to get some experience with, and also kind of fun and kind of different. This year we also did a pediatric hypoglycemia on an airplane case, where we set the entire room up looking like an airplane. We played airplane noises over the loudspeaker. We had them all sit down, we served them all beverages, and then the case got started. And that, you know, they were able to see what an airway box looks like, or not an airway, what an airplane box looks like, what you get on that box. So again, all of our sim cases have critical actions, and that's how they get points for them. And then, of course, winners. So we always make sure that we have a winner at the end of some form of a game, some kind of, you know, achievement for them. They all got medals, and then we went back and we put badges on their leaderboard. And then in addition, at the very end of the day, we debrief on everything. So we got to make sure we get that educational point in. We got to make sure that we correct any medical knowledge that our learners might have incorrectly, and make sure that everybody, you know, gets those same learning points. So we always debrief at the end of it.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about escape rooms. This has kind of become a thing over the past 5-10 years or so. Maybe you guys have been to an escape room. I think Megan's been to one, but did you escape?
I did.
Okay.
We had 30 seconds left.
Good job. You're really smart. So essentially, escape rooms, what we've done at our program is take some medical knowledge things that might be kind of boring otherwise, like, don't want to call out talks, but we recently did a talks escape room where we took different offices and we created them into stations. So it's kind of like a mix of a scavenger hunt and escape room where they have to crack the code in order to get out and go to the next room. I'll tell you, it takes a lot of time and energy, but I'm a fellow, so that's kind of why I'm there, to do these exercises. And the best part is that it is public. One of our talks escape is published online on jetem.org. So if you all want to do this, you could look it up and see how we did it, all the nuts and bolts of it. So I'm going to kind of show you a few examples. This is just the setup that we use. So we went on Amazon and purchased a number of different plastic lock boxes, so usually one a station. We like to do about 10 stations or so. More than that can get overwhelming for both sides. And then we purchased a bunch of different locks. So there's letter locks, there's also number locks, obviously standard ones. So here's going to be some games that we've done. So this was from our recent Escape the Asylum. So psych core content, so it was an EKG, and they had to select the option that correlated with the colored balloon and then pop the balloon. Once they did that, if they got it correctly, it would show them the next station. Here's another example from that activity. So it was basically a sheet of the different toxidromes, and they would fill it out and get a code, and then if they got the code correctly, they could move on to the next station. Here's another one from the Toxescape that I referred to that's published online. So this one's pretty straightforward, calculating an anion gap and an osmolar gap to give them a code for that one. And then this is kind of it's a UV light, but simply they shade out the correct answers of features of delirium, and then they have to match it with a shape on the wall. And on the back is the correct station to move on. And if they don't get it correctly, it says, you know, try again. One thing I do want to mention when you're planning, or if you're thinking about planning an escape room, is the flow. So it's really important as the educator you make sure you write out how you want people to move through the stations. If anyone wants to talk more about how to do this, I'm happy to afterwards. But this part is the part that will trip you up the very most if you're planning one yourself. And then, of course, as always, we debrief at the end. We go over all the answers. We like to talk about how things went. Did people communicate well? Because that's essential as part of this activity. And our man moves.
All right. Oh, sorry.
So the next one we're going to talk about is Pandemic. And has anybody played the board game Pandemic? I love it. It's super awesome. So Dr. Tui in the back and I actually developed this game. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is because you can create your own games. All right, you don't have to do something that's already out there. So our version of Pandemic, what we wanted to do was we wanted to review some infectious diseases with our learners, and we wanted it to not be an hour-long lecture where we just talked at them. Instead, we wanted to kind of get them involved. We wanted them to think about diagnosis, about treatment, and about prevention. So we built out a slide deck using Keynote, and each one of these slides ultimately became a card in the game for them. And so what they got was they got an envelope, and within that envelope, it had clues to what the disease was. So this is an example of our influenza. So they've got a slide that has kind of signs and symptoms. They've got a map of the pandemics or of the distribution of influenza in the world. They got a chest x-ray showing flu, pneumonia. They got some blood work. And they get these packets and they could look through them. And when they decided on their diagnosis, they would be able to tell their moderator, and their moderator would tell them whether or not they were right. Then they had to come up with a treatment, and they had to come up with a prevention to keep this from spreading to the other rooms. We set a time limit, and every few minutes we would go by, and if they hadn't diagnosed, treated, and prevented the disease, then we would deduct points from their overall point system. And the way we did points was we had Post-it notes up on the board or on a wall that were their villagers, and every time they didn't diagnose, prevent, and treat, we killed their villagers by stealing a couple Post-it notes just to add a little bit of anxiety to the game. If they didn't diagnose, prevent, and treat within a certain time frame, then their diseases would spread to the rooms next to them. So kind of a cooperative game. You want everybody to work together to try and prevent these diseases. This is an example of them all working. They also got some CDC cards, so if they were having a really difficult time with a disease, they could use a CDC card to go to a neighboring village to try and get an answer, or they could use it to look up something on their phone for approximately 1 minute. So really fun to build. It was a great way to review the infectious diseases with them, and also kind of, you know, a little bit different from just lecturing at them.
And so I'm sure, Dr. Wray, that you will hopefully publish that soon so that if anyone in the audience wants to use it, they can. One day. All the things we have to write up. And so a last example that we'll talk about is Sonolympics. I'm sure you're familiar with Sono Games that they have here at SAEM. So this is our version of Sono Games at our residency program. Deja Esner from Kaiser created this, and she was the brains behind the operation. But basically, this is just an ultrasound-themed competition. And our residents form teams, and they have to compete in various stations. And there's checklists akin to Sim Wars, where they have to achieve certain checklist items. And some of the stations were trying to find a foreign body and identify what foreign body was inside the balloon, for example. And they had to use a water bath to be able to do that. And doing a rush exam while they were exercising to just kind of put some more fun into it. And then getting a certain amount of scans in a timed period. And so that again, is something that they have here at SAEM, so you can get some ideas from here, or you can certainly email me and I can give you some ideas for the stations that we used for this. So you might be asking yourself, why is UC Irvine doing all these crazy games and spending all this time? Is there an effect on learning? Are their learners more engaged? Are there better patient outcomes as a result of these games? And so we don't know, obviously. We haven't done an amazing study. There hasn't been good literature in undergraduate medical education or graduate medical education to show that involving game elements into a didactic conference improves performance, improves patient outcomes, or anything like that. But we can extrapolate from the K through 12 literature. There's obviously been a lot of studies that have been done in the K through 12 literature that do show an increase in recall when you apply game elements. So for example, if you can think about where in the world is Carmen Sandiego when we were kids, or Math Blaster, or the typing games that you used to do in high school or in junior high. And so those actually do improve performance and improve recall in certain learners. And so while we can't prove that this is effective in graduate medical education, I can say that my learners come to conference very engaged. They're excited when they know that there's going to be a game at conference. They talk about it. There's a lot of chatter about it before and after. They talk about how fun it is. They come to conference more often when there's games. We have residents that have very high conference attendance because I know they're excited to be there for the games. It creates, in my opinion, it may affect their practice-based learning and improvement. It may show them that they enjoy learning, they enjoy participating in these things, and maybe that they'll want to become lifelong learners as a result of that. I can't prove that as well, but I do think that that's a potential effect. One thing that I think it's important to note, though, is don't do games just for the sake of games. You want to make sure that you are choosing the correct instructional strategy for whatever you're trying to teach. For example, you probably shouldn't teach a new concept through games. That's going to be something that you're going to want to do through small group exercises, through a brief lecture, a brief interactive lecture, or a team-based learning assignment. This is more kind of solidifying knowledge. This is something that would lend itself well to multiple choice questions, for example. So are you able to apply this knowledge to this scenario, or are you able to answer this question correctly? Those are the things that do very well with gamification, whereas you probably wouldn't want to teach a new concept like EKGs for someone who's never seen an EKG before in a game. You'd probably want to wait till they have a little bit of fundamental knowledge. And so I want to open it up to you guys. How many of you do you have any other ideas for games that you've used in your residency program? Do you have any questions about using games?
One quick thing to throw in, this is also a great way to flip the classroom. So you can give your learners some form of a learner responsible content, whether it's a podcast or an article or a book chapter or something for them to do at home. And then when they can come in, you can use that game portion for those higher level, to kind of raise the bar on them, make them apply those concepts. It's a great way to flip the classroom as well.
Absolutely.
And I'll just say one more thing. My lecture format was very traditional in my residency, so coming here and seeing how this is applied has been hugely impactful. I think it really is fun, and I know there's probably some old school people out there who feel that maybe this isn't important to do, but really it feels more engaging and it is fun. At the end of the day, it's extremely fun to do. So if you guys have any questions, we'd love to talk to you afterward. Anyone have any questions right now? Yeah.
You want to bring them?
I have a very loud voice. These take so much time to prepare. I'm trying to figure out, how do you segue professional development for the game creator? How have you published these? What are the guidelines for it? What's your advice? Have you guys done this yet?
Absolutely. So we, are you familiar with the Journal of Education and Teaching in Emergency Medicine, JEDEM? So JEDEM and then MedEd Portal are two potential places where this can be published as scholarship. And obviously it's an instructional design strategy, and so you're going to need to go through what objectives you created. You're going to need to go through some other important elements of curriculum design and whether or not this was the appropriate instructional strategy for whatever you were trying to teach. And so that's one way to publish it. In terms of faculty development, I think it's just important to have one or two champions at your program that are interested in being the ones that lead this and start this. And I think that it will, much like a pandemic, spread to the rest of your faculty that are excited about creating. It'll impact them.
Even if some of your faculty aren't super interested in creating the games themselves, there's always people out there, always faculty members that are really interested in the content. So we have some faculty members that really have no interest in creating the games, but they're more than happy to help us come up with like questions or worksheets to be a part of it.
Or be at stations for escape rooms and just
exactly.
kind of watch the learners run around and have fun. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, that will help moderate things as well.
Yes. You need fellows. That's what I do.
Yeah, fellow.
For chief residents.
Any other quick questions?
And then if you do want to implement something, we do have some that are published up on JEDEM under the small group section, I think. So you can, they're like locked and ready to go. All you have to do is download them and follow the instructions, and there's like maybe an hour of prep work into it.
Have you done this for like team-based learning? I mean, it seems like you could apply that where you have the learner responsible content beforehand, and then you apply it in the game. So, because I don't know, I guess that you could introduce somewhat of a new concept by doing that, or the application part.
Yeah.
But have you done it kind of? I mean, it seems like there is some overlap there because they're in small groups and competing and whatever.
Yeah, we do. Or do you want to answer? We do a lot, quite a bit of team-based learning with our residents, and so the problem is with the flipped classroom in residency education is would hate for someone, I think in undergraduate medical education, the flipped classroom works so well because they have time to read. And sometimes with our resident learners, I don't want them to not come because they didn't do the pre-reading. And so sometimes I'll do the pre-reading in class, so we could potentially do the pre-reading like right before we start the game, or there just won't be any pre-reading. It's like something like whatever their reading schedule is for that month should cover the concepts that they are applying here. And so we flip the classroom quite often, but we do modify it just a bit because I hate, residents are so busy that I don't want them not to learn because they didn't do the pre-reading.
Another thing that really helps is having moderators at a lot of your stations. So depending on what you're doing, like when we did the pandemic, we had a moderator in each room who knew the answers to the diseases. They didn't have to prep anything. We gave them a separate envelope with all of the information in it. And if the learners were really struggling, they were there to kind of help them apply that knowledge. Same thing with like our escape rooms. Yeah. We usually have one moderator for every 2 or 3 rooms, and they kind of bounce back and forth. And if the learners are having a really hard time calculating an anion gap, then we jump in and we help them out with it. You know, we don't want them to sit there and struggle and waste time when we can jump in and kind of help them apply the knowledge that they already have.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say about team-based learning, I think the questions that you write for that application exercise should kind of be that higher level where they're really talking in depth about something, not just more of the core content. So the escape room might lend itself to like a multiple choice question that they just quickly answer and move on, versus a team-based learning, you really want to be getting into the depths of, you know, the decisions they're making, why they're making them. So that's the only other thing I think about related to that. But I think it's a good idea and it potentially could be done.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
We just haven't done it quite as much for our program.
That's a great idea.
How often are you guys doing one of these games?
So we do a TBL, like a team-based learning exercise, probably once a conference. We do a game probably once a block, so about once every 4 weeks. Does that seem about right?
Yeah, and we're really excited about this. So this has been like the last 2 years where we've got 3 APDs, me, we've got 2 academic fellows, a couple other faculty that are excited about this type of stuff. And so one of us will kind of start it, and then you'll hear some chatter on the other, like Shannon and Alisa are like, we're going to make this pandemic game, and it'll be great, and that'll be 3 months from now. So we have a lot of teamwork. But I think a good goal for someone, if you only have 2 or 3 of you that are interested in doing this, is maybe 2 times a year for the first year, and then kind of slowly adding more in. Because as you build these games, you'll be able to recycle the elements of them. You may not, for example, the Tox Escape Room, you can use all those ways that you played the game. You just need to come up with new questions, for example. And so the meat is in trying to figure out like how I'm going to present this, whereas the medical knowledge the core content you can put in different ways. Yeah.
Just curious, when you Kahoot, I know that you could do that anonymous, like you could do it where they just make up a name, or you could do it with their real name. How do you implement that at your institution?
So we let our residents come up with fun names.
Yeah.
There is a way, if you want to export like how the residents answered and get a full list of what they answered for each question and everything. And one of the ways we talked about this, if we really didn't want it to be completely anonymous, because we let our residents have it anonymous right now, they just kind of get to make up a name, and we usually end up finding out what everyone's name is through the course of the Kahoot, because they're not quiet. Like they like joking, and they're like, "Oh, I'm so and so today, and I'm so and so."
They like to put each other's names.
For sure. Yeah, but you could assign your residents all a number, and then they could come up with a funny name and then have their number at the end of it. That way, you could export all of the answers, and you could just line up the numbers with who they are, and then you'd know. So that would be one way if you wanted to get the data on that.
And we kind of notice who's winning the Kahoot every week, and we know who's doing the reading and who has never won a Kahoot for months and months, and suggest that maybe they should do their weekly reading more often. Yeah.
I'll share this story with you because I think it's relevant. I worked with a dental faculty member years ago, and she had some serious concerns about the status of their dental school because the students didn't care about their board scores. All they cared about was that they passed. So she started a gamification program, really doing a team-based learning strategy. But what it did was it built teams that continued to work beyond the course. And they studied together and prepared for their boards together. And the prize was a $5,000 award paid for by some outside benefactor. And her board scores over 5 years just went up significantly because all of a sudden the student cared about it.
Yeah.
So this can work well.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Even without money.
We anecdotally have had our in-service exam scores go up quite a bit over the last 2 years.
And just hearing the residents get excited is a lot of fun. You know, there'll be a resident that's overnight and they're going into conference the next day and they're like, oh, when's the game going to be? Is it going to be the first or is it going to be the second? Like, can I stay? I really want to stay. I really want to participate in the escape room. Okay, I'll stay up for like an extra 2 hours so I can do it. Whereas previously they would have been like, it's a lecture, I'm going to go home. Which is kind of, it's fun to see. It's fun to see them get really excited about it.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.